It is yours truly, Senator Lindsey Graham. And apparently I don't spend enough time in the great state that I represent, North Carolina, South Carolina. To say that I don't have a presence here, how dare you? Because I am trying to not only help South Carolina, but the entire country by taking billions of dollars and funneling it and changing it and putting it in the ceiling so that we can use it to build this wall that so many of you voted for. Not only am I trying to get this wall built, I'm trying to get some really nice wallpaper on it. That takes time. That takes effort. I'm sorry that I can't be here with you all the time in South Carolina, kissing hands and shaking babies with the cast of Delivery and fiddly-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee with the banjos on the front porch. Sorry for having a life. Why are you so worried about what I'm doing? I'm taking care of South Carolina, and I'm taking care of North Carolina because Carolina's on my mind. The whole country. I'm trying to do things for all of you. Me and Katie Britt and Ted Cruz and the rest of the cast of the future worst season of Dancing with the Stars ever. So why don't you not worry about me? God bless North Carolina and God bless the United States. South Carolina, North Carolina, close enough.